right into Chapter 6. So here we go. Chapter 6. I'm back, Russ announced as he let himself in. There was no answer and he frowned. Colin? It was then he spotted the light filtering out of the den down the hallway. He patted there quietly and leaned against the door jamb, watching Colin read. I'm back. The older man jumped. God's breath, Russ. Don't scare me like that. He eyed him critically. You're still in one piece? In Greyspire, you either come back or you don't, Russ said, especially now, based on what I found out. And that is? Do we know where Morgan is? Not yet, but we should know by early tomorrow morning. Shannon's going to bring the info and come to meet you. There was a long moment of silence. And the story? I've got dinner ready. Russ blew out a breath and followed him to the kitchen. Yes, I probably should have told this years ago, or certainly when we left Hilltop, but it's hard. It's why you and Soren hit it off so well, Colin said astutely. Something you're not proud of. To put it mildly, Russ rubbed his face. It goes back to when I was barely more than a toddler, when my parents started letting me be outside alone with the neighborhood kids, and I met Christopher Malone. Chris was a couple years older than me, and he was always different, off-kilter, violent, but with an ability to sweet-talk every single adult around him. All the neighborhood kids, even the older ones, feared and hated him. You didn't? I did, but I was equally fascinated, and he sensed that weakness. I became the closest thing Chris had to a friend, but it wasn't a good friendship. He used me as a punching bag enough that he got what he needed out of it, but not so much that a few apologies didn't have me believing him every time. It started to shift once I went to school because I met Shannon and Matt, who were my age but from other neighborhoods, and even at 5, they saw him clearly. Matt's older brother also knew about Chris and had preemptively warned Matt away. So at school, I tried to keep my distance from him. But by then, the other neighborhood kids wouldn't really play with me because they wouldn't come near Chris, and Chris was always near. We scuffled and went back and forth between being friends and not for years. I was convinced I could fix him. Then he got old enough to join the Weavers, and Taylor, the guildmaster at the time, refused to take him officially, despite the fact Chris had done the time like the rest of us, running messages and the like from about 10 years old. So Chris convinced his parents, who had never admitted anything off with their son, to move to the Hostlers' territory where they didn't know him. Okay, so guilds. You said 5 groups. Weavers control the area we're in now, Hostlers are another, and Smiths, Masons, and Wrights. Can I take a guess where at least some of this is going? Go for it. The less I have to tell, the better. Chris rose quickly in the ranks of the Hostlers, became the leader, has fucked everything, and now has Morgan. And Matt, Russ said softly. Colin's eyes widened. Shit. I'm sorry, Russ. He nodded, but that doesn't cover why I left. No, but I'm assuming it has something to do with the fact you've owned your childhood home for what seems like a long time, Colin said, with exactly the right amount of sympathy. Russ pressed his lips together, looking down at his hands. Once Chris moved, Taylor turned his attention to me, Matt, and Shannon. We still weren't officially members, but we had a lot more responsibilities than most of the other kids. You could officially join once done with school, right? Like we've been talking about with Kin. Colin nodded. Because even Greyspire wasn't willing to fuck with the education decrees, and a lot of work within the guilds required basic skills. But when I was 15 and Chris was 17, we fought for real. He only visited sporadically, but he came bragging, up to his usual bullshit, and tried to push me around. But since I didn't see him as much, the distance had given me a certain amount of clarity. This time he came with knives, and I beat him. Enough he had to call mercy. He ran home, tail tucked. I thought that was the end of it. I rode that high for days. Until, Colin prompted, when he trailed off. Until I returned home from an evening of work, well after my parents' curfew, because I was a teenager, and I could see my future being bright within the guild, so why did I need to listen to my parents? It felt like a fresh punch to the gut, remembering that his last conversation with his parents had been a fight before he'd gone out. Russ saw the understanding dawn in Colin's eyes. Chris killed them, but he hadn't acted rashly. He'd set it up so the trail led me to 2 assholes who operated outside the guilds, so had no protection. Russ let out a breath. I killed them, and not with any sense of mercy. He flexed his fingers. Taylor gave me a lecture, but let it pass because the 2 had been a pain to all the guilds. No one figured it was a loss, and there'd always been a bit of an eye for an eye mentality around here. I knew it wasn't right, but it helped somewhat, until I saw Chris again. God damn, Russ. He told you he did it, and you didn't kill him? Colin asked. He huffed a laugh. I should have, right? Because he killed my parents, and if I had any sense of... He waved a hand. It would have spared a lot of bullshit and further death. But I was a kid, one deep in grief. In hindsight, of course it was Chris. Why would the other 2 idiots kill my parents, who were regular employees of local commerce? Everyone's tied to the guilds here. And that hit me when he told me, so I reacted. I left that night without much more than a note left at the house for Matt and Shannon. And until today, I hadn't been back. I'd barely even written Matt. And what letters I've sent have only been more recently, once Soren and I both started talking about atonement and running from our pasts. Once we visited Alexandria, I saw exactly what Soren had come from. Look, don't add not talking to me about Greyspire to your guilt, Colin said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. Would it have helped to prevent this? Of course. But at some point, we would have had to deal with Chris, and I suspect he would have been prepared then too, even if it had been a couple of years ago. That's true, based on what Shannon said tonight, Russ admitted. Still, it's not easy, being here and seeing what's happening to the city. Of course it isn't, but not everything's on our shoulders. It took years of Greyspire failing itself before it got to this point. The Wrights are completely gone. The Smiths and Masons have been mostly forced into Weaver territory, and they're all too paranoid to ask for help. Colin frowned. We're helping them anyway. This has gone too far. I know. It's part of why I asked Shannon to come meet you tomorrow. But, Colin, this is basically a miniature civil war. You want Soren. I want you both. Colin nodded slowly. There's Dean to think about. I know. It'll be Soren's choice, of course. If you're okay with it, let's wait on any other decisions until we know more from Shannon tomorrow. Knowing her, she'll be here early. Try to get some rest, Colin told him. I'm going to read for a bit longer, then I'll double-check the locks. Which room should I use? We know which room was Morgan's, so take the one across the hall. Neither of those were yours, his friend asked with a knowing smile. No, mine's at the end of the hall, but it'll be too dusty to sleep in. I'll use Morgan's, he said, throat feeling thick. The room he was giving Colin had been his parents'. Morgan's was the only one without memories. Night, Colin. Night, Russ. He headed up the stairs, pausing at the landing and staring down the hall at the closed door. He took a deep breath and forced himself to walk towards it, one step at a time. He wrapped his hand slowly around the knob and pulled it open. The room smelled musty, but looked exactly the way he'd left it 10 years prior, which meant not a single kin agent who'd passed through had used it. From the dust on the floor, Morgan hadn't even peeked in. His old blanket was still tucked neatly, a small worn teddy bear sitting exactly in the center of the pillow. Russ could remember clearly the morning he'd left and the care he'd put into making sure the home was clean. He'd forgotten about the bear, though, and moved over, ignoring the dust he stirred with each step. He picked up the bear he'd slept with every night until he left. Somehow, he felt like he didn't deserve Hopper anymore for what he'd done. It was weirdly good to see the bear again, though, even if a bit dustier than before. He rubbed what was visible off the brown furry head before placing it back on the pillow and going over to the desk. Russ pulled open the second drawer, retrieving the painting of his parents as newlyweds. It had mostly escaped the dust, being locked away in the desk. He stared at it in the flickering light. Releasing a breath, he set it on the desk, kneeling down to go through the drawer. Before leaving, he'd collected all the things of his parents he treasured most and tucked them away in this one drawer. He'd always known the house would be safe. It was well within Weaver territory, and he hadn't had enemies within the guild. Russ found he couldn't remember why he'd saved half the things, deciding he needed to go through it in earnest at some point. He sneezed hard once, then again, and shook his head, straightening. He tucked the picture under his arm, grabbed the candle, and headed back down the hallway. Russ turned to the bedroom Morgan had been using. He set the picture up on the bedside table and placed the dirty dishes and book on the ground before turning his attention out the window. He had no doubt Shannon's news the following morning would be that Chris had Matt and Morgan. He could only hope both were still alive in one piece. The trauma that would come with having been in Chris's custody could be worked on later. Fuck. Russ sat in his bed and pulled his knees up, resting his forehead on them. He wasn't surprised at how easily he'd agreed to all this. Colin could say everything that had happened since he'd left wasn't his fault, but he couldn't see how. He'd clearly been the only one willing to go directly up against Chris, and his leaving had left Chris with a straight path to this point. His history with Shannon, quietly dating and fooling around in the way of teenagers, with the years of friendship before that, well, that made it more certain he'd act now. Shannon was even more of a soft spot. Was even more of a soft spot for him than Matt was. This is going to get interesting fast, he murmured. Russ took a deep breath and forced himself to kick off his boots and get under the covers to try and sleep. He was up well before dawn the next morning, scrubbing dust from his room. When he heard the first creaks coming from Colin's room, he left off the dirty job and headed downstairs, knocking briefly on the door to let Colin know he was up. Methodically, he went through the cupboards, recalling what he'd noticed the night before and whipping up a quick breakfast. Colin appeared bleary-eyed and still yawning a few minutes later. Oh, thank you. I was going to do that. The more things that can get the restless energy out, the better, Russ informed him wryly before passing him a plate. Shannon should be here any minute. Then we confirm the bad news. And figure out how to get both Morgan and Matt away from him, and how to take Chris out. Easy peasy, Colin said with a crooked grin, and Russ appreciated his bravado at that moment. They were finishing eating when a knock on the kitchen door broke the silence. Even expecting Shannon, knowing Chris's people would never knock, both dropped a hand to their belts where their knives were strapped. Who is it? Russ called, standing slowly. It's me. Hold on, Shan, he said, relaxing slightly. Even hearing her voice, he peeked out to ensure it was her and only her before unlocking the door. Colin gulped down his last bit of food before standing politely. Shannon let herself in and smiled briefly. Hi, Russ. What'd you find out? She ignored him for a moment, turning and nodding in Colin's direction. Shannon Culvert, Guildmaster of the Weavers, she said, sticking out her hand. Colin took it firmly. Colin Lockholm, head of kin, as you already know. Since you're friends of Russ's, nice to meet you. Otherwise, I'd be more uncertain about meeting someone who reports directly to the king. I'm starting to understand why. Greyspire is certainly unique. Shannon snorted and glanced at Russ. Paul confirmed it. He's got Matt and Morgan. God's damn, Russ said, sagging. There had still been a small chance, or at least he'd kept hoping there was. Then we need to get moving. Chris has been known to break things he considers toys by accident. Both Colin and Shannon winced. As such, Colin, I need you to do some things for me as soon as possible. Okay, hit me. First, I need you to arrange a meeting between Chris and me for tomorrow evening. Second, as soon as that's done, I need you to go see if Soren will come. But his protest was overrun by Shannon, whose eyes widened. Please tell me there's more than one Soren out there. Russ had momentarily forgotten he talked around Soren the night before. No. No, I've still only met one, although it's entirely possible there are more. Do I even want to know? Short version, Colin said, is that Soren's a big part of why the Battle of Oak Bridge wasn't a prolonged, bloodier affair. He's also the one who killed Vladimir. As such, I offered him a partnership as I moved to create kin. Russ lives with him, so he acts as my second to help protect the fact that Soren's survival isn't fully common knowledge. Well, damn, okay, that will take some getting used to. In the meantime, can you get you or one of yours get Colin to the border to arrange a meeting? Russ glanced at Shannon. Why am I doing this? Colin asked slowly. You're doing it because even he won't dare harm you, at least not until he figures out whether or not he can get away with it. And it probably won't be him anyway, but one of his people. That makes me feel so much better. I know why we need Soren, but I don't like leaving you here alone. I've got Shannon in protection of the Weavers, but no one here, Colin said pointedly, gesturing around the house, even as his gaze darted to the dark circles under Russ's eyes. They all knew he hadn't slept much. I can handle it, or I'll go stay with Shannon at the big house if it gets to be too much. And what should I tell him if he asks about Dean's safety? I don't know. Tell him the truth. Dean should be safe with Shannon, but I can't guarantee it. I trust Soren. I won't be here for your meeting with Chris either, if you want it tomorrow night. As soon as I can get us back is the next morning. I know, but I don't actually want you directly involved yet. We'll need you to rally what constables and militia there is, but I need to see where Chris's head is first. I don't like this, Colin told him, but Russ knew he'd do as he was asked. Their friendship and trust ran too deeply for him not to. He looked at Shannon. I'm trusting his safety to you. God's breath. Colin, please. Russ couldn't help groaning. No, I mean it. Russ, do not do anything stupid. You will be here when I come back with Soren and Dean. Anything stupid can wait until after that. Got it? Shannon, keep him from doing anything stupid. Lock him in this house if you have to. She smiled crookedly. That I can manage. I'll take Colin to the meeting myself. What else? It was her turn to turn to Russ as she asked. I need meetings with Rain and Cal, and if there's anything left of the Wrights to talk to. Her gaze searched his face. And you're sure you want to do this? Not only is this what Ken does, this is personal. Chris won't hurt another person in this city after this. I'll kill him myself if I have to. And you're sure you want Malone to know you're here? I suspect he's figured out I've got a connection to Morgan by now. They're both in danger as long as he's bored waiting for me. If he's hunting me, he'll hopefully pay less attention to them. This hardly makes me feel better, Colin put in. Russ could only shrug. Come get us once the meetings are organized, he asked Shannon. I'd help if I could, but I suspect you can do everything much faster. You're right about that. Stay here in the meantime. I'll come get you. If the meetings are at the same time, I'll have Paul, Tim, and Margs take Colin while we're meeting with Rain and Cal. Be careful, she added. It's still not completely safe. We won't leave the house, and we'll keep the doors locked. If anything happens, we can hold our own, Colin said, at least until your people can get here. That's what I like to hear. She tossed them a salute and disappeared out the door. Colin locked it behind her. Okay, so we have a couple dishes to do. We can finish the dusting. Is there anything else we need to do before these meetings? I don't think so, Russ said, which sucks. I'd prefer not to think too hard right now. It was hard to admit that, even to Colin. His friend gave him a crooked smile. Yeah, I know that feeling. I saw a Chester checkers board in the den last night. Russ made a face. Yeah, I guess that'll be our best bet. But cleaning first. Are you good with the dishes? The biggest dust pile is my room, so I might as well get back to it. Yeah, I'm good. But Russ, Colin said before he turned away. Yeah? You know I trust you, right? Of course. Good. Then I'm only going to ask one thing of you. Russ wasn't sure where this was going, but nodded. Okay? I know we're afraid for Morgan and Matt, but it won't help them if you get in too deep too quickly. It's pretty clear this operation hinges on you. You've got the knowledge and connections in Greyspire, plus everything you've learned since through kin, which is something no one else has. Shannon, Soren, and I can help, but you've got the lead. You understand what I'm getting at? He did. Well, he hadn't led any missions that felt this important, or this personal. He'd run plenty in the previous few years of kin, which meant thinking things through and not acting rashly. They had to do this right, or the collateral damage, whether in sheer body count or in how important the people were who died, would be very high. The goal was always to keep that cost down. I understand, he said quietly. Good. Let's finish getting this place cleaned up, then play some chess or checkers, he said. Also, I'm making a grocery list for you to get Shannon to pick you up, so you'll actually eat. I hate that you're right, Russ muttered. I'm leaving. Colin smirked and waved him away.